Welcome back to episode 76. In this episode, I speak with David Kahn, who is the head of IKMA North America, or the Israeli Krav Maga Association. The head of the IKMA in Israel is Grandmaster Chaim Gideon, who is technically and officially the appropriate lineage from Grandmaster and founder Emil Lichtenfeld. Now, in this episode, we discuss all sorts of things, from approaches to teaching Krav Maga for civilians, military, police, teaching philosophies, and some other concepts, including ideas, including what's going on with the police in the U.S. at the moment and use of force. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions since 2013. So, a couple ways you can support this podcast and UTKM is, of course, reading our content and continuing listening to us, so thank you. But you can go to utkmblog.com. You can click on Support Us, and the Support Us allows you to either freely make a donation, which we appreciate, or if you want something a little bit more tangible, as humans do, you can always go to www.utkmu.com and you can check out our curriculum. There's some free content up there, but the curriculum is paid to access, nothing too crazy. Sign up for a month or a year, whatever you like, or a continuous usage of our program. I do not offer rankings online. It is simply meant as a supplement and as a perspective on how I approach Krav Maga. The advanced curriculum, as I discussed actually with David, is not up there yet. I need to refine it a bit more and then figure out how I want to give access to it appropriately. And of course, you can go to, still on our blog, utkmblog.com/support us. I have a bunch of Amazon affiliate links, including books and some other products. It's a not comprehensive list. I haven't decided what else to add on that. But if you like the products or books there, you can hit the button there and click on the Amazon affiliate links. Now, if you want to train with Urban Tactics in person, when all the COVID shenanigans is done, you can go to urbantacticskm.com and sign up for a free trial class. We are, of course, in Metro Vancouver. Our teaching location is in Burnaby, British Columbia at this time. So come and check us out if you want to learn from me or my other instructors directly. That's urbantacticskm.com. Of course, check us out on social media, Urban Tactics Krav Maga on Instagram and Urban Tactics Krav Maga on Facebook. Then Urban Tactics KM on Twitter, though just so you know, I don't really use Twitter. So if anyone's ever tried to message me, I am probably not paying attention. It's simply a copy of our other stuff. I use mostly the Facebook and our blog, etc., as a means to communicate, and Instagram, I suppose, now that Facebook owns it. So check us out. So back to David Kahn. If you did not know, David is one of the earlier adopters of Krav Maga in North America, not the original. We discussed the three other individuals who in the podcast who originally brought Krav Maga to North America, but David quickly built a relationship with Chaim Gideon and became the official representative in North America. And also, if you peruse Amazon books, you will see tons of David's books. He has written, I believe he's on his 7th or 8th book. I think his 7th book is being published and his 8th book is coming out soon. I can't remember exactly. You can check out, though, on his personal website, David Kahn Krav Maga. That's David, Kahn, Krav Maga.com. That's his personal website. You can learn about him and his books. He's got DVDs and gear, etc., that he's put out over the years. Probably the most published Krav Maga author in English at this point. And you can also check out their training website, israelikrav.com, if you want to train with them in and around New Jersey, New York areas. You can train directly with him. And then he does have a author page on Instagram, David Kahn Krav Maga, as well as on Facebook at David Kahn Krav Maga as well, predominantly to do with some of the videos and the books that he has published over the years. So unfortunately, we did not have the normal 2 to 3 hours time that I would have loved to have had with him. He had to go pick up his son, I believe, so we had a bit of limited time. So we kept it relatively on topic today. predominantly Krav Maga and use of force. So for those of you who hate me going off on random tangents or political stuff, you are saved in this one. But I will for sure have David on again in the future when we have a little bit more time. So I hope you enjoy this podcast with IKMA North America head David Kahn. Krav Maga is not just a self-defense system. It is a way of life. Warriors Den is a podcast for Kravists, fighters, martial artists, warriors, politicians, and general citizens. Consider this. The society that separates scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Lucidity. Your host, Jonathan Fader, talks to guests in an open and uncensored format about their fights, their philosophies, and their lives. No topic is taboo, and the conversation may start in one place and end in another. As the quote suggests, you cannot separate the warrior from the politics and the world around them, as a true warrior must be a student in all forms of art and science.
You're listening to The Warriors Day, brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
So I am here with David Kahn, head of IKMA North America. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jonathan. Welcome yourself. And I'm happy to be on with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to have you. So, I mean, I could ask a million starting questions, but let's just start with the easy one is, how did life bring you to Krav Maga and then ultimately the IKMA?
My first experience with Krav Maga floored me, literally. I met one of the first Americans to ever train in Krav Maga, Rick Blitzstein, who trained personally with Emi Lichtenfeld in 1977. And I had come from playing Division 1 AA football. And the best self-defense I had at the time was running into somebody full speed in my head. And I've repeated the story, but it's true. And Rick said to me, hey, you look like you'd be interested in this kind of thing. And I had never heard of Krav Maga before. In fact, I had just been to Israel on a technology sourcing trip. And I saw that he was wearing a Krav Maga martial arts t-shirt. And I said, what is that? He said, that's Israeli, hand-to-hand combat. I said, oh, wow, I didn't know there was such a thing. He said, yeah, you got to check it out. And I said, yeah, I would really be interested in that, but I'm a first-year law student, and I'm really sort of a serious student, so I'd better attend to my studies. Well, 1 week of law school disabused me of that. It was boring. It was horrible, and I didn't know how I was going to get through it. Yeah. So Rick invited me to class, and then he said, hey, why don't you come on up front? And he said, put your arm out. And I should have known better, but I did. And he took me into a Cavalier 1, which is wrist lock. Summarily put me on my tahat, my back, and then put his foot on my throat. And I was extended like that. I should have been embarrassed. And I wasn't embarrassed at all. I said, how did he just do that? And I got to learn this. And that's how my introduction to Krav Maga. Yeah. So it was effective, to say the least. And then I trained for Rick privately for 3 years. He was a great instructor to me. And then he sent me to Israel to Grandmaster Chaim Gidon as part of the Israeli Krav Maga Association. So I went for a 6-week program with Chaim on my own. It was a amazing program. I was training up to 6 days a week, early morning to the evening. And it was a good thing that I was still in my early 20s because I couldn't do it again.
Oh, yeah, it's tough. It's even, I'm not that old, but never been an athlete, so I can train hard if I absolutely have to, but I prefer not to anymore. But you're a few more years on me, so I'm sure you feel.
Yeah, it's showing.
So then how did you go from that? What year was that, by the way?
That was in 1995. I started training, and then I went to Israel 3 years later.
3 years later. Okay. So how do you go from that to being the head of IKMA North America?
Well, Chaim and I developed a very special relationship, and I really, I love the man. He, to this day, we speak almost weekly on the telephone. He's in Israel. They're getting over COVID. And I knew that that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity before I began my professional career in New York, and that I would go to Israel. I wanted to go to the source. If you think karate, you think Japan, you think Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you think Brazil, Taekwondo, Korea. Well, Krav Maga is Israel. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons we also, in everything that I write or produce, it's called Israeli Krav Maga. because it's from the Israeli Krav Maga Association, but it's also, the original Krav Maga, and we take great pride in that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I find it like, me, I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and was exposed to Krav Maga from people who aren't even from here originally. And for new students, particularly in North America, I try to teach my students, but a lot of people just don't care, don't teach it, is sort of the origins of Krav Maga, the organizations and, politics and martial arts. A lot of people get just completely overwhelmed by the different organizations.
Unfortunately so.
Yeah, and so I'm actually really interested is the earlier days, right? When you came back and started teaching in North America regularly. Well, what were the early days looking like in North America regarding Krav Maga?
The early Krav Maga, the epicenter of Krav Maga traditionally or historically was Los Angeles, because Darren Levine had started expanding it. But there were the three horsemen. Darren was one. Another one is Alan Feldman, who recently passed. I've got a dedication to him in this next book coming out. And then there was Rick Blitzstein, who I mentioned had introduced me. The three of them had completed the instructor's course in 1981, which was I think it was about a 6-week course, similar to what I had to do. But it was orchestrated by IKMA and his top students. So the three of them learned Krav Maga, and they came back to the U.S. Alan Feldman actually had the first commercial school on Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia. So there was the Krav Maga Eastern region, there were the Krav Maga Association Central region, and there was the Western region, which was the LA organization. And it wasn't well known. I have watched its popularity along with everybody else who's been involved in Springboard in the last many years, and there are too many organizations to even keep count now. That to me is not a good thing, but at least it's popular. The reputation was always as brutal, and it as those who practice and teach it, we do obviously make it brutally efficient. But when you have somebody on television stomping on somebody's head and screaming, "This is Krav Maga," that's not a good representation of it.
I've met a few of those guys. Yeah, it does.
I know some as well. And what happened was it became wildly popular. It became a de rigueur to have it in a school, to expand the school's offerings. It was exotic, sexy, and it ultimately took advantage, or I don't want to say take advantage, but it used the IDF's military prowess and reputation to burnish, its martial capabilities. And when you get down to it, it's a very serious system, but there are elements of it now that have become all too commercialized with exercise, as sort of a synonym for Krav Maga, and that's not what I do, not what I would advocate. But there's that out there now.
Oh yeah, no, I the joke is watered down American Krav Maga. It's very unfortunate that I was I served in the IDF for a few years, and I didn't really learn Krav Maga. It's a bit of a myth, you're in the military there, you learn it's not. I was infantry. I had 10 lessons. The hardest ones were actually at where was it, Mikveh Elon at the Ulpan. They were brutal to us, and then the actual lessons in Krav Maga in Givati were very nothing new, nothing special, and people draw that myth. But what I really learned, just from observation, particularly with the firearms training, is the methodology of the Israelis, right? And I find, you come to North America, even with Israeli instructors, they don't always know why. They're just doing it and repeating it. And then you get a lot of North American copycats who don't really understand, the training methodology, and they're just teaching the techniques. So, we probably have similar thoughts on that. Anything you want to expand why that is, or?
With the military side of Krav Maga, I did not have the honor of serving, and I commend you and all of those who do. I really have profound respect for those who have served. By necessity, if you look at it, it actually goes to my training approach, that you want to train to the threat. And obviously, let's say if you have 10 hours of training, and you can devote maybe 8 of those to firearms, to room clearing, to battlefield tactics, weapon handling, all that. With a modern firearm, it makes sense to do that because the likelihood of getting into a hand-to-hand combat scenario is there, but it's not at the forefront of most people's concerns. And I believe it's the same thing with the American military. We've done a lot of work, fortunately, with all 5 branches, tier 2, even some tier 1 operators. And it's about finishing somebody very, very quickly. Yeah. The military Krav Maga that I've been taught is lethal. It's simply often getting to the dead side of the rear and separating the atlas from the spine, breaking somebody's neck, optimum strangulation techniques, crushing the windpipe, or putting yourself in a position where you can take out a secondary weapon, a handgun or a blade, to finish your adversary. So it's no nonsense. It's about closing. We've got a couple of things that we teach to close. And of course, it's also using the Rove, the rifle, as an impact weapon. Yeah. And I've been curious over the years how the Tavor would change the Israeli long gun techniques. And in a book, I did show using not a Tavor, but a FAMAS weapon, how the shorter length of that weapon has to dictate certain, tactics got to change a little bit. So it's a great question. I know that certain military units obviously get more Krav Maga training than others. And I also know, because of manpower shortages in the IDF, that there are different lineages of Krav Maga and different strains of it. In other words, if I know for a fact that 2 of Chaim Yidun's students were fantastic. These were 2 brothers, and they went to Oketz. Yeah. They found out their background, and they said, hey, though you haven't done a formal instructor's course here at Wingate, we know you're some of the best guys out there. Would you train us? And they did. Yeah. So it just depends on who you get and where you get it. And I'm not in any way criticizing the idea of Krav Maga. It's terrific. Obviously it's one of the best militaries in the world. They use great restraint, but it will vary depending on who the instructor is, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's common to any organization too. To answer your Tavor question, I suppose, is I found when I was there, we were in the first generation Tavors. I just missed the micro Tavors by a little bit. But the original ones, I found them very unbalanced because the back heavy to do the proper blocks versus the AR, etc. So, there's that. People don't always think about that when you completely redesign the weapon. It changes things.
Yeah, and the way you might have to defend against an edge weapon is, rather than using the length of the barrel to smash and deflect an incoming weapon arm, you invert it so that you've got the length of it. And that, obviously has to change things as well. But with the Tavor, I've shot it, and I have friends. My good friend Nir Maman, who's one of the best instructors you'll ever meet. He thinks the Tavor is a great weapon, but not for hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable analysis. They just made ARs prohibited in Canada, and I should have grabbed one before because the Tavors are 3 times the price. They're allowed though, funnily enough. Now, funny thing about the military, because I find people really have a hard time understanding military Krav Maga versus police versus civilian. And, I always like to tell a story. I had a friend who was, when I was there, he lived on the kibbutz with me, and he got into a black ops unit in Israel. I still don't know what the name was. He got into very high-level unit, then got a phone call, said, hey, let's go over here. So we're still not really sure, but, what little he could tell me of his training, it's physically it would kill me as a human being. But he would tell me we'd do Krav Maga 3-4 hours a week and on all this stuff for months on end. And one day he visited me in Vancouver, and this is the early days of my school, so our students weren't even that technically proficient yet. And in sparring, they technically were doing better than him. Because in the military guys, I find they're not the most technically proficient, let's say, martial artists or fighters. No. But they're lethal killing machines.
Yeah, no, their skill set is focused on other things. I can tell you that we went out to one of the most advanced training commands to give them some training. I was really, I'm sorry, one second, really quite honored to go out there. And we went in with great humility and said to the lead instructor, hey, we've got about 14 tactics that we'd like to show you. I'm sorry, I got it.
No worries.
about 14 tactics that we've got to show you, and we're not going to reinvent the wheel. You guys are consummate professionals, and here they are. And one of them that they particularly liked was getting a rifle. They asked us about getting a rifle jammed up against your throat. Point man gets jammed up on the corner, or it's the operator's own rifle, or an adversary's rifle. And we recently showed that to another top law enforcement agency for their out of DC, and they really liked it. So it's a few little simple things that can add to their repertoire of hand-to-hand combat skills. Good minds think alike. The rear naked choke defense that I showed this first group we're talking about, this advanced training command, they did it almost exactly like it. He wanted to know where we learned that. So this is what Hyam teaches. Yeah. And they said, wow, we like this, because again, good tactical minds, yours, mine, we probably think alike. Yeah. Very much the same thing with the Marine Corps with the McMAP program. We were fortunate enough to go as far as Japan to teach the Marines down to North Carolina, and the Quantico, which is the Marine Martial Arts Center of Excellence, with my good friend Ron Jacobs, who was the lead instructor there. And the Marines are great to work with. And again, McMAP and military Krav Maga have much in common. A lot of it is very aggressive with the rifle, being able to defend a garrote, knife fighting, and that sort of thing. So, you really can't reinvent the wheel. And one of the things I found really interesting was Krav Maga's evolution, that if you think back, the Arab armies had focused on judo as their primary system. Yeah. And I probed a little bit more and asked some of the old timers about what it was that IMI and the IDF. One of them is actually Boaz Aviram, who's a good friend. He was the instructor after Eli Avizar.
Yeah, I know. I had him on a long time ago.
Bo. Well, yeah. So he explained a little bit, and that's why our counter throw techniques are so formidable, because again, it was in response to what the enemy might be learning, and how to counter it, how to thwart it. Now, I also know from one of my most recent trips to Israel that part of the jihadi manual is to learn Krav Maga. Yeah. In fact, it's on page 28, I'm told, because they're watching, they're learning. So whenever any of us put out material, it behooves us to self-censor it. Yeah. The show, we're just not going to show. I know that my books and everybody else's books, some sort of similar ilk, have shown up in some bad people's training camps.
Yeah, well, that's a valid point. Like I COVID forced me to put my content online, primarily for my students, but anyone who wants to access it too. And I haven't put up the advanced curriculum yet. And that was something I was thinking, is how do I censor or people? One thing for Canadians is super easy. I just say, I want you to get a firearms license, and if you can't get that, I'm not teaching you, because you get the background checks and basic stuff. So I was thinking, hey, if you want the advanced curriculum internationally, you got to give me like an FBI background check or Interpol. I think that's the only really way you could do it. It's just a pain in the ass administratively to.
It is. It's a great way to vet. It's a great way to vet people. And that's kind of the beauty of working with the law enforcement community and with the military, is that you're dealing with people who are hopefully going to look at this as a professional skill, not abuse it, and they're serious. They're serious people who are mature in their outlook and why they might have to use it, and hopefully they won't use it. But that's kind of
that's the goal, right? Yeah. Now we can talk about law enforcement, but that's the whole thing. So let's just I want to switch to civilian.
Sure.
Because one thing about the military that I find the Israelis completely forget, especially a lot of their instructors, is you're working with the top 10% of physically capable people, right? And they lose that when they start teaching civilians. So that took me a while to get my head around, and it's a much slower process to teaching civilians, right? Our motto, turning lambs into lions. Like, I'll take you if you want to put in the time. Well, of course, most people don't, but we can build you up. So what's your sort of approach to teaching a civilian program, which is quite different?
Yes, and it starts with the goal and the end result. That for civilians, it really is about running away from conflict if you can do it. Yeah. It's about avoiding it and disengaging. You're not there to win a fight. You're there to survive. Yeah. You're not there to pin somebody down, unless it was an active shooter situation or you were a civilian intervening, in defense of somebody else. And it's certainly not to kill somebody if you can help it. So from a civilian standpoint, I really emphasize this a great deal in this next book that's coming out. It's about being able to recognize the impending signs of danger as law enforcement, as military, but to take the necessary measures to avoid it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that does have a common thread with military, law enforcement, and civilian is to be able to de-escalate yourself. So, this is the biggest thing, is that once we start administering these skill sets and getting people to really get proficient, taking out somebody's knee with their heel, or being able to, chop somebody in a carotid sheath or the vagus nerve, don't do it if you can help. Yeah. And only when push comes to shove and you can't avoid or retreat, do we then teach them then, to use the Krav Maga. But like everything else, we don't teach chokes to the law enforcement community ever, other than defending them, or if it's a lethal force encounter. So when you teach chokes to civilians, you really run the risk of having another civilian kill another person if they hold on too long. 10 seconds or more is arguably brain damage is setting in, and if you hold it, for several minutes, you'll kill them. Yeah. So there's certain aspects of the training which are touched on. They're not necessarily emphasized, but they're emphasized. I shouldn't say emphasized. They're emphasized that if you do this, you better be damn well justified in doing it, and you better be able to back up what you did, because there may not be any reason for lethal force when you up the ante. Defending against a firearm, an edge weapon, assault, an impact weapon, well, that changes the end goal too, and the scenario, or multiple opponents. But to focus on your question about civilians, it really depends whether you're training, a 20-year-old male, or a mom, or a young girl going off to college, or a senior who wants to stay in shape and, is just thinking about his or her safety. But they all have something in common. We teach them the same exact tactics. We emphasize the same movements, and we work with people's, shapes, sizes, heights, abilities. One of the challenges I sometimes have is, for example, I taught a class last week, and one of the students is a retired state trooper, but he can't kick. His knees are so bad. Yeah. And we're working on kicks. I said, listen, you got to adopt this technique. And I took him aside and showed him the hand techniques against it. And he said, no, that makes sense. It's because you've got to make it work for your body type and for your capabilities. The mindset, though, of course, is to prevail. If you have to use your body as a weapon or to defend yourself, you're not going to lose. Yeah. And it's to escape the situation unmaimed if you can.
Yeah, it's teaching aggressive. I actually find it's easier to teach people to be aggressive than it is to teach aggressive people to be not aggressive.
Well said. Good instructive point. Yeah, that's really well said.
There's usually like mental health issues going on or something like that, which actually brings up, the whole like use of force perspective and self-defense, because say in America and even state to state, it's very different, or Israel, it's very different, or in Canada, it's very different. It's something I think Israelis sort of have failed to acknowledge when they go globally, is they don't really say, hey, what's legally allowed. Like Canada, you can use, like hypothetically, you can use lethal force for self-defense, but it's a big, like, if you look at court case law, it's like you don't really want to be in a case where you've done that, because from what I've seen and I've talked to lawyers, it's like literally flip a coin here. If you use lethal force, it's very gray, even for civilians. And, an example I can think of is there was a friend of mine who had a troubled friend or whatever, and they were on a bus, and their ex-boyfriend got killed. And that the case was the ex-boyfriend pulled a knife on someone, and a scuffle ensued, and then the guy defending himself ended up stabbing the ex-boyfriend in the temple as they fell. And my understanding of the case was that if the defender had his own knife on him at the time, they would have charged him because he would have intent, versus he actually didn't have a knife on him and he used the other. And it's like, to Americans, that might be like, what? Right? And I don't necessarily agree with our stance in self-defense in Canada, but it's something to really consider.
It is. Yeah, no, and again, I've done more and more legal research over the years, and this book it really delves into it, the American case law for civilians, and it's really in the early 1900s that it becomes more defined. about the level of force or the level of proportionate counter force that you can use. Yeah. And the American courts are reticent to define it, yeah, but there are parameters in which you have to worry about. And in many states, there's what they call preclusion, yeah, where if you can retreat safely, you have to do it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't apply to the home. But even in the U.S., if I'm teaching a course in New Jersey, I have to think a little differently than I might do it in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Because many of the people who we train with in Pennsylvania are actually carrying concealed. Yeah. So you as you say, you really have to do your reconnaissance or your homework about who you're teaching and where you're teaching. Yeah. So I applaud that insight. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I'm noticing. Won't get too political because we have a short time, but the increased number of constitutional carry states is going up due to politics, and gun stuff is very known in the Krav Maga world. You know, people who don't know very better are like, oh, gun stuff. Now, I don't teach the gun stuff to beginners because I think it's a little delusional. I think you need to have your basic combat skills, because what's good disarming a gun if you can't punch and you can't move and you can't use it? What are your thoughts on the firearms aspect of Krav Maga for civilians?
Well, that is a super question, because I've often said, and I think you'd agree, there's certainly more leeway in defending an open-handed attack. You know, and if you look at the American statistics, aggravated assaults, 40% of the time it's with an armed type of thing. And I've done the FBI research. These are 2018, and when you look at the aggravated assaults, I'm just looking at it right now, 25% of the time is I'm sorry, what we're looking at are firearms are 26% of the time, and personal weapons are 25% of the time. The 40+% of the time is actually robberies. So when you look at these numbers, you train to the threat. But what I often lament is that you'll see firearm disarms taught, and there's no second chance at that, because you know that round's coming out. It's just, you know, it makes sense for anybody teaching it to tell the students, because of the trigger flex response, that if that gunman's fingers on the trigger, especially handgun, you know, that bullet's coming out. Yeah. So it's not just the defender safety, it's third party safety. But what I find interesting is that so many people teach the takeaways and they don't teach the mechanics of the weapon. That if you're actually going to take it away and then redirect it and point it at the erstwhile assailant, they don't, you know, tap it, rack it, make sure that gun's in battery. Oftentimes these videos, who people don't know any better, will just take the weapon away and then redirect and point it and assume they've got a functional weapon. Yeah. And the pros know differently. I give my friend Nir Maman a great deal of credit, because in my early days, he worked extensively with me on my firearms knowledge and capabilities.
He's phenomenal.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in his doing so, because I wanted to learn the Israeli method. No. In other words, I didn't want an American method, as some of the teachers over here have done, and try to embed it in Krav Maga, because there are different things that we use. You know, obviously racking the weapon, slingshotting it into somebody's face, and other things which I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. Yeah. Funny thing is about that is I had the opportunity. I was training up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where Israel Military Industries has their American headquarters and their office. So my good friend Pudi Carson, who's a police officer, said, "Let's go over to IKMA." I said, "Sure, let's go." But he was great, because he said, "Hey, it's Officer Al Pudi Carson here. We're here to come look at your collection." And they let us in. But what we ended up the second time visiting them, and I was asking the American firearms instructor for some of their weaponry, you know, what method he preferred. You know, the slingshot method that the Israelis sometimes use, or the top of the rack. And he actually changed his thinking into the slingshot method. Now, talking about racking is like talking about religion. I'd rather, you know, leave it to the person to decide what to do, sort of like cuffing for that matter. But, you know, if you're going to teach firearm disarms, you really got to have a qualified instructor who knows weaponry. Yeah. That's one of the requisites. That's where the Israeli instructors come in. The Army, police, they definitely have the background, as do most American police personnel and military. But with firearms, you really need to understand the inner workings of or at least the rudimentary inner workings of the firearm and tactics to teach it, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. One thing I don't like intentionally do this, but I always use airsoft pistols for disarms if I'm allowed to legally. And often what happens with disarms is the magazine will fall out. And what I find an interesting observation without throwing anyone under the bus. But if I'm training with other Krav Maga instructors, and this has happened multiple times, and I bring my training airsoft, there's a thing that almost always happens if they don't know firearms, is that magazine falls out and they panic, stop, and stare down. I'm like, why are you stopping? And it just tells me that a lot of these people come from a traditional martial arts background and they don't understand the firearm stuff at all. Have you run into that?
Yeah, well, one of my primary training tools is actually a very well made airsoft, and it looks just like a SIG 226. You couldn't tell the difference. In fact, one of my great students, she's 15 years old. I said, "Here, carry this," because we're doing training outside. And she said, "It's better you carry it than I do." But at the time, my arm was a sling from the surgery. But my point there is that you could be held up with an airsoft, and in the fight of the moment, if you do succeed in disarming him, because of the weight and everything else, you may do everything you normally do, and then yell at the guy, get back, and then he rushes you. He knows he's got airsoft. You haven't debilitated him enough to put him out of action, and he comes back at you. So I said to him, you can't panic. You've got to be able to use that handgun as an impact weapon, getting off and integrating it into your combat movements. And you can't just focus on the handgun, using it as a battering ram, because he may be able to defend it. We teach to defend against a handgun being used as an impact weapon as well. So when you get into firearms training, it can't just be sexy for schools to put it out there. Hey, we do what the Israeli commandos do. And I've seen such awful disarms out there. There's a guy that just put out a book. I took photographs of him just to get people's feedback. He was threatening me, and I just said, because he's holding a firearm pinned right to his head. In other words, on the technique, and he claims to be an expert, a 4th degree black belt or whatever he's claiming. And this is not about ego, and it's not about rivalry or anything like that. You can't teach techniques and tactics which will get people killed. And that's where I really draw the line. I'm not saying I'm the best. I'm not saying I'm any better than anybody else, but you got to know what the human body does in conflict, time and motion, and how firearms function, and it's just crucial. So I'm sitting on my soapbox right now, but that's what I believe you got to do. Same thing with an edge weapon.
Yeah, no, I think that's, if you're too technique focused in any system, right? You're seeing in the rise in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the principle based first principle. Nir teaches like that too. He actually opened my eyes just because I was so used to the Israeli 1-1-2 drill, and I didn't understand. And for me, the first principle of any self-defense, forget Krav Maga, is critical thinking, right? And with new students, I know most of them aren't sticking around, so I actually spend half my time like telling them tactics and how to think. And one thing I teach, it's probably a little bit different, because someone comes to mug you, knife, gun, whatever, and I see a lot of instructors, Krav Maga and not, say, just give them what they want. Now, what are your thoughts on that situation before I say what I think?
Just give them what they want. Well, that's why I decidedly have fewer students than I otherwise might. Because it's not that I give them what I want. It's not that I don't give them what they don't want. I hew to the curriculum, because I know this is the way it's got to be done from Chaim and the association. I can also distill it down to belt advancements, that people want to get high rank and they want to do it soon. It's immediate gratification. And if you don't know the basics, at least the way I've been taught, if you don't know the basic movements to balance the body positioning, the combatives, you can't possibly master the advanced tactics. So in some sense, we had got to, as a business, cater to people's interests and their needs, but not at the expense of teaching lousy tactics or, focusing on ridiculous scenarios, somebody swinging from a rope with a gun shooting at you. Things like that. So if you cater to what people want, a lot of it's going to be exercise and feeling good, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But you will have to sacrifice quality. You can't do both. And I really try to focus on our quality over quantity. But there's got to be a balancing act. But the bottom line is that you better teach stuff that's effective. Whether you're emphasizing an hour's class, you're doing 40 minutes of calisthenics or push-ups or sit-ups, but the actual Krav Maga you teach, it better be good.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. A couple things there. Well, so I'll finish what my thoughts on that situation are. It depends. If you don't teach, I think if anyone doesn't teach their students, hey, like, you need to be paying attention to how they're acting. because I think a lot of people are very naive to violence and like, oh, if you give them what they want, they'll leave you alone. I'm like, well, where are you?
I'm sorry, I may misunderstand compliance.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, give them what they want. No, compliance is the better part of valor for
yeah, yeah,
sure. In fact, I can relate that Grandmaster Gidon was held up in his travels with his wife by three people with knives.
yeah,
And you won't find a more capable person in the world. But because he was with his wife,
yeah,
he gave the throwaway money that he kept for just such a purpose.
yeah. So there's a tactical thing, right? I have it's very Israeli. I have my money and I have the robbing money.
And I do it too. Same thing. Bad credit cards, the whole thing. You carry one wallet that's close to you, and you carry your other throwaway wallet. And the thing is, it better have something in it to satisfy them, because otherwise, I've actually, again, and I've got a book number 8, which I'm writing right now, which is dealing with mugging situations. And it's about a 50-50 split in studies, whether somebody will come up to you and ask you to give away your valuables to that person, and the other 50% doesn't trust you to give everything up. So he or she will paw through your pockets, your bags, and oftentimes that's done with an accomplice to keep you at bay.
Yeah.
But as far as giving it up, when I think about Chaim, if he had been with his sons, those guys with knives may not be around today.
Yeah.
But so the situation dictates it. But the ultimate thing is just like de-escalation, self-de-escalation. You got to come to terms with it beforehand.
Yeah.
That if you're at gunpoint, give it to them.
Yeah.
One of our students, Anuj, was in Mexico City, and Nir and I had just worked with him. And a few months later, he was held up at gunpoint, and in Mexico City, and he took away the weapon, hit the guy several times. Was so surprised to take the weapon away, didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. His friends were screaming at him, "How could you endanger us?" Meantime, the guy's lying on the ground. He said, "Run!" And they took him a while to run, and so he threw it in a dumpster, ran back to his hotel room, and wrote to us right away what happened. So my thought is this, from my own personal training: if I recognize a threat right away, and I don't have time for that heart rate to skyrocket, I'm still in control. In other words, if I react without thinking, that is the best solution. But if I have time to think about it, or with my wife or my kids, I'd have to bite. I don't want to say bite the bullet, because that's not what could happen. But I'd have to, put my tail between my legs and sublimate any egotistical issues to give them the money, because that's the way to survive it. Yeah. The issue, of course, is if they want to take you someplace else, that you don't go to a secondary crime scene. The FBI bears it out that more than half all people taken to a secondary crime scene, especially at gunpoint, are killed.
Yeah.
So there are many dynamics at work, but ultimately, if you're in such a bad position where the guy is standing, 10 yards off, he's holding two hands on the weapon, he's postured, he knows what he's doing, tells you to throw his wallet, throw your wallet to him. He's trained. You better do what he's asking you to do. He's a professional.
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty much the same answer as it depends, really, because where are you? What are you doing? What do they want? Because, I like to remind people. People don't like to talk about, I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't like to talk about culture in self-defense. I had won't name names, but I did a seminar with a very very respected American self-defense expert, not Krav Maga. And I sort of brought this up, like, it's hard not to bring up the race. I don't want to make it about race. It's culture more than anything. And then I brought it up, and, of course, how could you think like that? And I'm like, well, if I'm in some countries in Africa, they might just kill me and take what I want, even if I do what they want, because it's easier for them. And not picking on Africa. It could be Mexico City, right? It's North Americans or Americans and Canadians always like, oh, the resort towns. I'm like, go to Mexico City, see what happens, right? Yeah. It's very different.
It's such another important issue to bring up, because it is societal. I have a friend, Sean Hobbs, one of my top friends, and he's written Introduction. Grew up on the mean streets of Plainsboro, New Jersey. Amazing story. He's got an amazing book called The Bastard Child. And he made it all the way through the Air Force into their special operations, but he'd seen so much violence at his time. And I asked him, because he'd been mugged before, what his opinions were on something. He said, look, I'm African-American, so I'll say it. Black people don't give up their monies easily.
Yeah.
And white people are more of a target because they may be more affluent or anything else too. And my own personal issues or thoughts on race or anything, I don't really care about skin color at all. I just care about behavior.
Yeah.
In a way, I respect people. There's all of this in the U.S. right now, and there's no doubt some truth in it. And I'm working on police reform, but it's people's behavior that dictates my reactions and what I might do. But you're so right. If you were in Africa or in Grand Cayman, where I've done extensive teaching, they'll mug you with a machete. And the other point is that if somebody comes so close and puts a knife up to your neck, this or this, do you think they practice that regularly with a live human? They could very easily cut your jugular, so it really, like everything else in self-defense, is situationally dependent on what your immediate assessment is, and you got to go from there. Repeating what.
Yeah. So you did talk about police reform. I think it's an interesting topic. Obviously, the politics of America right now, which are spilling over into all the other Western nations. And,
Sure.
One thing is consistent. Police need more training, and also civilian overviewers know nothing about use of force.
You said it.
So it's a mix, and politicians will just do whatever the hell they feel will get them elected, which obviously it creates a nightmare. So what are your thoughts on what's going on? Because you mentioned police reform and how
there are so many issues that are floating around, and it has much to do with the training. And the problem is that there's so many people who are dictating law and legislation, and they have no idea, as you just pointed out, how difficult it is to put somebody under control who's passively resisting, let alone actively resisting. I just pulled up a proposal that, our message moving forward is that policing cannot equal unwarranted, excessive, or deadly force. There's no reason for an officer to punch somebody in the head to get him or her to comply. And there's no reason that so many people are shot who are unarmed, but for a lack of hands-on training. And it is a default mechanism. And I'm not saying I wouldn't fall prey to some of this stuff too if I were in that position, you or anybody else. But the simple fact is that the average police cadet gets about 60 hours of training in the academy, including de-escalation methods. So 60 hours out of a 6-month course is not an overwhelming amount. In fact, it's not enough. And they've got to be able to, to do a better job, including uniform curriculum. And, the bottom line is that we call this their de-escalation education and communication, and it's that all Americans, everybody in the world, any citizen by a police force should be treated with decency and respect, presented choices rather than threats, and asked rather than being told to do something. In other words, asking them politely or firmly to do something. And if they don't, you have to explain why they're being asked to do something and what the consequences of not doing it are.
Yeah.
Laying it out there that, and this is all assuming that it's a lawful order. Yeah. That the police officer is lawfully commanding them to do something. So, but as far as the hands-on training, jiu-jitsu is very popular. It's very good. I'm a big fan of jiu-jitsu. Our police training focuses on doing a few things really well. They have other force options, including multiple officers responding. I think that taser is a very good invention. I believe that hands-on training is more important for my own reasons, and not because I think that the taser has done us out of any opportunity to promote training. And ultimately, policing just can't be a beatdown. If you have 3 or 4 officers working against somebody who is not armed, you've got to get them out of the car. They're going to prevail over time. You have to have patience, because that kind of impatience and resistance and it gets people's dander up, and that's all part of that being able to calm oneself under a difficult situation.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this. Everyone's got their opinions, but I was watching the video of that woman who thought she had the taser officer and shot him with their gun, which to me right away it's one, she did an automated reaction and she didn't really understand, her training's not there. But for me, it's like that guy jumped in his car and was trying to get away, and they all just sort of jumped on him. Now, I was just thinking about it. I was like, perhaps in some aspects, training, obviously we all agree that they need the training because they don't not getting it, but it's the how to handle situations. And I think about what's going on in Canada. So when I was in high school, I'm pretty sure I know who the officer was because I think he was my school liaison officer. During a high-speed pursuit, he crashed into someone's house, the cop. And after that, the policy was don't chase people anymore. And you don't have as many violent encounters possible. And I'm thinking that I don't know the specifics, but I believe it's because, hey, we got their license plate. We probably have some sort of ability to track them. And the stance here is if we got that, don't chase them. We'll hunt them down later.
That is the overriding position of most American police departments now. They can only shoot into a vehicle under the strictest of circumstances. The NYPD was a forerunner in that kind of tactical change. But, if I can, let me bring you back to the Dante Wright shooting that we talked about. It was a terrible outcome. The man should not have been shot, but it began actually with the cuffing.
Yeah.
That officer who was asking him to put the cuffs on, police know, we all know that, I say I'm not a police officer, but those who train understand that resistance often is ignited when they see the handcuffs coming out of that first bracelet is put on. So if you watch the video, the reason he was able to escape the police officer did not put him at a position of disadvantage to cuff him. Mm-hmm. In other words, there was a mistake made. The keys were still in the ignition. The door was still open. They didn't move him far enough away from the vehicle. And so that was the first mistake. And again, there was no intent to make a mistake or anything like that, but that's where we know the resistance begins, and that's where it's got to end as soon as those cuffs are put on. And one of the most important things for any kind of restraint for policing or other units, the military understands this very well, is getting those zip ties on or those cuffs immediately, so that you can dominate the situation. You know from your training about the word dominate. You're like, I've heard it quite a bit. But it's true. Not dominating in a way that you're beating somebody down or causing excessive pain or anything like that. But you got to put an end to the resistance. Yeah. You got to, and that's another form of de-escalation, which very few people would define it. De-escalation is your way out of it, but also de-escalating is putting on an overwhelming tactical display that they realize that resistance is no longer available.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Atlanta one, the Wendy's Atlanta one, where they clearly had him in a control, obviously not. It's like, dude, if you just taken 6 months of BJJ or something, that wouldn't have happened, right?
Yeah, I my personal opinion is I don't think that was. I think that was an unjustified shooting. For several reasons. But one of them is that the police officer knows how many charges that taser has. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, both of them, after the second one had gone past them, the guy had discharged it. But again, it's commanding the situation and getting that situation under control immediately, because it's far easier to get out of a situation where you're getting held down or cuffed than actually or providing the mechanisms for police to actually contain somebody within objectively reasonable force parameters. In other words, I don't believe anybody ought to be getting punched in the head, the neck, the kidneys, when 1 or 2, 3, 4 officers have them on the ground. There's no reason for it unless that person is resisting to the point where it could be considered a deadly encounter for the officer, weapon retention included.
Yeah, it's always about the perspective, because everyone has a different stance of what's acceptable force and what's not acceptable. For me personally, if you're trained, of course, knee on neck is fine personally, as long as you're doing it in the way to need. And I find, as a smaller individual who's not physically gifted, I need to be, really dominant in controlling their body positioning. And so sometimes for me, and a lot of my students even, it requires pinning the head and neck to the side and controlling them. Of course, you don't stay there for extended amount of time if you don't have to. But obviously with the recent cases in America, they don't even want to touch the neck. And my perspective is, if you have the training, because you ask Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys, like I think as a purple belt, like I'm a purple belt, that's at the point you should know if you need to let go or not. That's how good your training needs to be if you're using any kind of neck technique. But I'm seeing in the States and in Canada, no, you're not allowed ever, right? And to be honest, I've never been a fan of putting the knee on the neck, period, because of the level of training that I've received. I look at it as the legal eggshell theory. You take the victim as you find them, and there's just too many ways to create permanent damage, including death, when you target the neck and the spine, which again is why on the military side that's exactly what we do. Yeah. And I'm bringing that up. I may be doing a national television interview, and so I'm going to be very clear that
we teach the military exactly to do what we're teaching the law enforcement not to do.
Yeah, it's policy.
So it's just the rules of engagement versus objectively reasonable force. But again, in a deadly encounter, if you have a smaller woman who's being attacked, with a knife overhead, it absolutely behooves her to strike him in the windpipe to try to destroy that cartilage. So again, it depends on the threat. Deadly force, there are no rules but one, as we all know: survive it.
Yeah. One of the fundamentals of conflict for us, Krav Maga. Now, de-escalation, we talked about that, and controlling the internal. Like I am not an expert, but I did a degree in psychology, so I often integrate that into, before I left because of wokeism in university, but I actually adopted the Jeff Cooper mental color code into my
It's very helpful.
And I'm releasing a new blog series on how you can use that as a simple concept, both in your personal and self-defense, in being, in the civilian world being taught it's mindfulness now. And I it's a loaded word because there's so much woo-woo and nonsense out there with mindfulness. But I'm like, hey, I can take that color code and just say, are you aware of your nervous system and mental state right now? And that really ties into the ability to de-escalate. If you're someone whose nervous system's always in, say, red, even if you're not actually fighting, it's going to be harder to de-escalate. And you were saying that's something you're really breaking down in.
And I'm going to ask the publisher to send you a copy of this book, and maybe we'll be able to speak about it. Again, if you're interested. So much of it is understanding your own triggers. What will set you off? What is your proverbial red line in the sand? And when is that crossed? Some people, they'll be able to push it back and push it back and push it back. Other people, the minute that person sets a toe over it, are going to go ballistic. And so if you understand your triggers, you'll be able to deal with it a little bit better. And the biggest thing that I've done a bunch of reading as I can, some great authors, but it's called affect labeling. And, I'm getting angry now, recognizing what the emotions are. And you have to do this instantaneously. Why am I getting angry? Well, that guy just gave me the finger. Who does he think he is? Doesn't he know I could break his finger so that it would never work again, in such a way? But again, that goes back to then thinking beyond the immediate gratification of putting somebody in his place or a beat down, which in the end, bullies really don't learn from, towards the legal liability. You as a IDF soldier and, running a blog on self-defense, I've got books out there. It is not worth it, because you are going to get in such legal jeopardy, both civilly and criminally. Everything you worked for, everything you've attained could be taken away like that. Then how are you going to feel when somebody takes away your house because you have destroyed his knee in such a way that he's not going to walk the same way again? So that all factors into being able to explain what you did and why you did it, which also goes back to your perceived level of threat. And one of the things that I think about more and more is, if I had to use this, we prepare our students, and part of that is your training is going to be used against you. Well, I'd rather flip that dynamic, and I want the training to actually be in your favor, to be able to explain, hey, Your Honor, or whomever, to a police officer or opposing counsel, from my training experience, I understand and recognize what are normal movements that so-and-so was supposed to be doing versus attack movements, which you can clearly see on video by his forward lean. He's gripping his hands in such a way that he's moving towards me. You can see the vasoconstriction. You can see his neck bulging. You can see, all of these tell signs. These I'm forgetting the word I use, but they're preceptors to what's going to happen. So again, I digress, but I come back to the issue about the color coding and being able to look at a situation where that this is something that's going to piss you off. You've been there, you've done that, but if you successfully negotiated it once, that's the key. If you can do it once, you can do it again. The one thing that may set me off, and I really try to not think about it, is I'm Jewish, and any kind of anti-Semitism, particularly glorifying the Holocaust or Nazis, or Hitler didn't do his job or anything like that. I really need to be careful, because that is I see red, and I've got to be able to contain that kind of rage. And of course, the difference between anger and rage is, my simple understanding of it is that rage, you can sort of still deal with somebody. You can talk yourself off the edge. I would say anger, you can deal with somebody and talk yourself off the edge. Whereas rage, the decision for violence is 99% there. It's already been made.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I can relate to that. I've written about it, dealing with just a variety of mental health issues. Nothing significant, but it's like dealing with that. The angry teenager, right? I'd never got into any trouble or anything. It's just as I'm learning psychology and growing and teaching, and you start to realize, like, oh, I need to recognize the mental aspect of this. And now Krav Maga is really well known for its aggression. Obviously, it's an important part of Krav Maga. When you need to be violent, you have to. I find, again, the Israeli instructors, I don't know what your experience.
It's aggression at the expense of technique.
Yeah, they just struggle when you start talking. I had one very well known, very aggressive Israeli instructor. He's like, "Oh, that's all gimmicky and bullshit," and I'm like, "Or is it you don't understand it?" That was specific to that individual. I have another instructor, Amit Himmelstein, who's wonderful. Still very aggressive how he teaches, but he'll remind you guys, this isn't the 70s Krav Maga anymore. Everyone's got cameras, right? So you being one of the foremost individuals in North America, it's like, how do we reframe what Krav Maga is for modern times, realizing that yes, there's aggression's a huge part, but we also really need, because people still don't get it anymore, that we need to adapt as we go, which is a core thing of Krav Maga anyway. So
yeah, when you couple sound tactics that work against concerted resistance with aggression, you've got a very formidable individual.
Yeah.
One of the issues too is that so much of Krav Maga has got to be grounded in reality, all of it. In other words, it's got to work against concerted resistance. It's got to work against somebody who's going to give you a professional boxing combination with the hands acting like pistons, an MMA type, knows how to take you down and smash your head in the ground, or a trained fighter with a knife, which is a nightmare.
Yeah. Who
understands, the eight stab and slash patterns like it's his first nature to do so. Yeah. And so it can't, aggression is instrumental to the training. It's got to be interwoven into it, but not at the expense of just saying that superior aggression will defeat any kind of attack, because this is not true.
Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah. Well, and also, I often ask sometimes, I'm like, how many of you have just trained or played with a professional fighter? And most people are like, no. I'm like, you have no idea what a trained individual. I know tons of MMA fighters, and even if I pull, go for the eye, go for the throat, if I don't pull it off immediately and get out, and they realize, oh, we're doing this, I'm in big trouble. And I think a lot of Krav Maga guys just don't want to accept that reality.
Such a well said observation again. With professional fighters, they don't mind. It's not that they don't even mind getting hit; they like getting hit. Yeah. It's something that's and those who fight, we understand it a little bit. You have got to disable him. You've got to break down his structure that he can't move, and that's the bottom line. And keeping in mind that if you do go for an eye, you do go for a throat strike, he can do the same thing if he flips it, because maybe they're still in the mindset that this is there's some rules that apply to this, even if it's a street fight. But the minute you throw out the hakokin, you're going to go into such a life and death struggle that you better get it right. And that's where obviously aggression and intent is so important. And I don't want to misstate that I'm criticizing aggression. You have to have the superior intent in any kind of self-defense, any kind of fight. Your intent has got to be every bit at the level of his, and then more so, coupled with practical, debilitating tactics.
Yeah. So well-rounded program, I suppose. Yeah. It's very much. Yeah. I think we agree on that. Is I sort of start basic stuff. Hey, hit, kick, move, but more importantly, think, because I know most people aren't going to put in the time. And then I start teaching them how to control and grapple as needed, and in case you can't run right away. And then I start teaching the police and military tactics for those who actually want to stick around. Because for me, should be good Krav Maga program is. You should be able to at least have a general idea how to deal with sort of any situation.
Yeah. Yep, yep, and that's important with the training level. You know, the way I'd understood it in Israel is the second belt level is an orange belt, and with high-end students, those guys are just amazing. And the idea is that you ought to be able to contend or to thwart any kind of unarmed attack at the second belt level. You know, again, looking at the typical attacks. Yeah, you have to expect the unexpected, and we've got to approach it that way. You know, again, just doing a few things really well. In my experience too, the curriculum that I've got is very expansive. Chaim has done some amazing improvements over the years, but it really boils down to a family of movements and combatives. And if you learn to do those from the beginning of your training and to understand, you know, a few key concepts, we're really able to get people competent and confident in their skill set. And, you know, to go back to one other thing you said about principles, the principles are really important, but one can't just say that, oh, the system is made up of principles. No, there are actually some real tactics that you need to learn. You know, for example, how to El parry, how that rotation works, not too close to your body, not too far away, but, you know, how you're going to deflect an incoming stab when the guy's going to try to stab you, you know, probably 10 more times with that knife. Yeah. How you're going to deal with, again, time and motion. If a guy pulls a gun at you and you start to telegraph, you're going to try to disarm, he's going to retract it while probably pulling the trigger. Yeah. So what I tell people, or I suggest to people, especially with all the videos that I've worked on, and I sell them through Amazon, I try to write people notes for every one they get, is that if you don't have a great instructor to work with, and even if you do, go to the internet, go to YouTube, go wherever, and look up some real attacks. I said, because the ferocity and the determination of the attacker is going to catch you off guard if you have not been exposed to it. Yeah. And I actually will break up our classes. I actually use these depending on what I'm teaching. I'll upload a few videos and I'll actually show the class. You know, I'm working them out really hard. They're all huffing and puffing, and I take a break for them to digest what they see. And I obviously watch the videos ahead of time, and I watch the reactions on their faces. And most people who are not, you know, haven't grown up in street situations or law enforcement or military, are absolutely dumbfounded and then similarly aghast at what they see. They just can't comprehend the level of violence that they're seeing. Yeah.
Especially if in a city like me, Vancouver, it's you know, anytime anyone says, "Oh, it's really dangerous here," I'm like, "You have no idea how safe it is here." And it's a lot. You can't convince some people here because they've convinced themselves, you know, even though there is some violence here and there and people get killed, it's like, nah, this is a really, really safe, even compared to New Jersey or New York, it's really safe here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a luxury. It's a great thing, you know, and it's wonderful if you don't have to be code red all the time, because you're in your safe environments, because you can't do it. You'll tax yourself. You know, you can't maintain that level of alert. And that's one of the reasons, you know, personally, I lived in New York City for 4 years. That's where I began my training. But I was always on edge in the subway because I worked on a pack line. You know, if you're always constantly looking over your shoulder and waiting for some kind of suspicious character to walk in front of you, you'll never get anywhere in New York City. Yeah. Same thing with Penn Station. So I prefer to avoid crowds. I've done fortunate enough to do some traveling. You know, I one time in Rome, I was with a girlfriend, and she enjoyed shopping for sure, bag after bag. And there was a motorbike duo that was going to rip her bags. They were just going to just grab them because I could see them revving up. Yeah. And I usually try to stick on the outside of the street, but she had walked outside, and I grabbed her and I pushed her, which she didn't quite like. And I was prepared to kick the guy off the motorcycle, and they veered and they went going. So, you know, even in Paris or in law school with another female friend, we had a bunch of kids come up and start fluttering the papers. And they were trying to cut her bag with a razor. And I said, get away. And I took a very aggressive stance towards them. So, you know, it's a shame that you want to be on vacation and everything else too. And yet you're a target. It's just the way life is. But it can't ruin or, you know, beyond good common sense where you're traveling. You can't inhibit yourself to the point where you're not living.
Yeah. It's common in the safer cities like Vancouver. It's like, or let's call it, it's a woke ideology. They're like, well, they shouldn't have attacked you. And I'm like, you're right, but they are. What are you going to do about it? And, you know, trying to make people realize, like, yeah, you want to avoid, like, I don't like crowds either. You know, I have a love-hate relationship with New York. Anytime I'm going, I love the food. I feel I want to punch everyone in New York because I'm like, they're so aggressive. And it's just like, oh my God, compared to Vancouver.
Yeah, no, it's an attitude, and just one of the great things about Krav Maga and any other good self defense is that it teaches bearing, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to get into it. I could be wearing a Krav Maga shirt or hat, and somebody may want to challenge me because I'm wearing something like that.
Yeah.
But it's not that I wear it to. In fact, I'm actually careful what I wear these days. But just you're bearing that. You don't want to have that victim look, and you don't want anybody else to get attacked. But ultimately, if it comes down to your dissuading somebody from attacking you, and they'll go find somebody else, it's about self-preservation. And learning it.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. I often ask myself, I have a big mouth. So when I was growing up, I didn't know how to fight. And I never got jumped, even though I was very aggressive with some people that I should not have been. And I never got jumped. And the only thing I can think of is I was that kid who they're like, he's not connected. I'm not in a gang. I'm not anything. But they're like, we're never really sure what he's going to do. And they know I was willing to be violent if needed. And they all knew that, even though we don't think he can fight, but he'll be violent. Right. And I think that says something is if you're going to act crazy, you better be able to back it up, or else they read it and be like, no, nah, you're faking it. Right. And occasionally I've met people, I'm like, even in when I was younger and didn't have the training, it's like, yeah, I'm going to leave now because that person is not only crazier than me, but is capable of greater violence. I'm leaving. And that's probably what saved me a few times. It's the recognition of, no, they're crazier than me. I'm out. Right. And I think, places like Vancouver, people are just so naive about what people can and will do that they're like, oh, I'm fine,
It brings up one of the real important points, I think, in any kind of self-defense discussion, which is preemption.
Yeah.
Preemptive self-defense. The law is clear on it, but it's anything but clear.
Yeah.
In the last book I wrote, and this one again, I made the analogy that Krav Maga is very much the IDF mindset, that Israel is a very small country, the size of New Jersey, and that the Israeli command staff understands that you can't absorb punishment. Yeah. You got to take the fight to the enemy, which is Krav Maga, which is being more aggressive and tactically sound to take the fight to him. And one of the historical precedents I brought up was the 1967 war in this book, where Israel preempted the buildup or the provocations, or whatever you want to say, the bellicose actions of those Arab countries, and destroy their air forces in short order. The best kind of preemption. Interestingly, there's a book which I'm reading right now, which talks about Soviet involvement as an aside and how that might have played into it. Yeah. But regardless, let's assume that the those nations were going to attack Israel, try to overrun it again. And the IAF delivered what is historically maybe the most punishing blow in military history to preempt a larger war. So from a self-defense perspective, if I can articulate why or how I know he's coming at me, and I can preempt it by whatever tactic I think is most applicable, that's great, but I better be able to justify it, because if not, I just attack somebody and I'm going to answer for it. Yeah. So it's really, it's fraught with peril, but has its advantages.
Yeah. And, I emphasize that. I'm like, you need to be able to articulate why you did what you do. And, depending on where someone is from, they if they're from Russia, they're like, why? And you have to you're in Canada, buddy. You don't have to like it. You just have to, I was teaching a firearm safety course, and a guy from some Eastern European country, right? It's not considered safe in Canada to shoot over top of a hill because you can't see, and it would be considered negligible discharge, and you could get charged. And this guy is like, what do you mean I can't shoot over the hill? Why? What kind of stupid rule is this? You just could not convince this guy that you're not allowed to do that in Canada. It's totally different mentality, right?
Yeah. I was showing my 12-year-old because I said, hey, you want to watch something interesting? We looked up soccer hooliganism. Yeah. Hooligans fighting, and watching the different teams and the pack of males going at each other with MMA gloves on too. I said, you want to watch some brawling for the sake of brawling? What I said to him is, I want you to pay attention to those combatants who are picked off and isolated when three people start beating them mercilessly. And he was appalled at that. He said, that's not fair. I said, that's what I want you to understand. It's not fair.
Yeah.
So, again, violence to most people is it's something that can, sort of cajole fantasy. It could be a worst nightmare. It could be all sorts of things. But no matter what it comes down to, I think it's an ugly affair. It's something that is really, when you really think about it. And as I've gotten older, it's well known that the human brain doesn't fully develop, particularly in men, until age 26. My thinking about what I might do to somebody at age 26 versus age 46 is very different.
Yeah.
For men, but it's a good thing. And that's why these young guys who we train, they've got to have good mentors. Because a lot of guys, you probably experience it too. They want to see if it works. Yeah. I said, it works. Believe me. Yeah. It'll work. So fortunately, the students who we get are good people. When we go do seminars, when I travel, usually it's good people. And for our school, we actually insist that somebody come in before they sign up, because I want to see who it is and what their motives are. It's only a responsible thing to do, I think.
Yeah, I usually assess people, and if they're off, I'm like, yeah, peace. Now I relating what you're saying, when they want to see it works, like that's something I have to be very careful of. Because of my size, I do not like doing private lessons with guys who are like 190 plus, because it's just not fun for me. And I had one student he's a freak athlete, just naturally gifted, bigger than me, and I was showing how to get out of side control from the bottom, and he just decided, I'm gonna put absolute all my pressure on John, and obviously I can't get out because there's a significant size and strength advantage. Couldn't get my finger in his eye because the way he had pinned him, so I just grabbed his ear and just pulled hard. And he's like, okay, yeah, I deserve that, because he realized, like, hey, man, sometimes it's not about the technique here. I know you want to assert your dominance, but I will do what I need to do.
Exactly. Can I give you a laugh? One of my instructors had the same thing happen in New York, and he side control. He's back on the ground. He took his thumb and went, yeah. You know where he stuck it? Yeah. And the guy jumped. He said, are you crazy? He got out of it.
Oil check, I guess.
Expecting the unexpected, or doing the unexpected. But you're right about that. And I've had the benefit of working with some of the best NFL players, National Football League players. And that's where Krav Maga has really shown its worth to me. Not because I'm trying to fight with them, but you're not going to win a strength or size or fast twitch muscle fiber battle with these guys. They're that good. So you really have to be literally figuratively on your toes. And I enjoy showing them and how this works. This is a football adaptation, which I've created with my partner, Pooty Carson. But there's no substituting technique combined with intent. There's no doubt about it. But it should work for everybody. The system's got to be designed. And I'll maybe I could summarize it this way. The Krav Maga that is often taught can be influenced by the size of the person teaching it. Right. It's natural. The Krav Maga that I espouse to teach, I'm not that big. I'm about 5'11", hovering around 200 pounds. So I'm not big. I'm not small. Bigger than me. But the thing is that I have to always consider that Chaim is as strong as they come, but he's about 5'7", 5'8". He doesn't have the reach of some of the other Krav Maga instructors out there. And therefore, he makes it doable for a smaller person against a larger person. But there's some big instructors out there who just take for granted their abilities, and they're able to use physical dominance to reinforce their techniques. And it works for them. It's a good thing it works for them, but it doesn't work for everybody. So that's kind of something that I always need to take a step back and say, could a 100-pound woman or smaller man, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, man, woman, can a smaller person do this to overcome, to thwart this kind of attack? And if a smaller person can't do it, only a larger person can do it. It's not good tactics.
Yeah. Well, I 100% agree. I mean, I probably wouldn't have come to that conclusion as well if I wasn't so small, because I was seeing, you get some of the Israeli instructors are small, but they're just nuts, and their willingness to just never turn it off. It's why the teaching methodology, they assert their dominance early, and they get people just doing it.
And I think that's fantastic. I fully agree with the mindset, but combine it, make it symbiotic with real good tactics, and you got a unbeatable.
Yeah, because I have certain techniques I'll teach, but it's like it'll be the last resort. Now, for a lot of the smaller people, like they really want to jump to that last resort because it works higher percentage for smaller people. I'm like, hey, shift your mentality, like get good at the initial techniques because those are the ones that are going to prevent you from going to the ground.
Right.
That's the one that's going to get you out faster. I understand you're 100 pounds. You have that backup option if you have to. Because physics, you know, I say you can't cheat physics, but you can if you use biology, right? You know, the groin, the eyes, the throat, when it's appropriate to get that mental reset. And I think teaching the strategy aspect is probably one of the hardest things to get in people's heads.
I've got a 300-page book on the way to you.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if I'm almost positive we're thinking alike.
Yeah.
But as I said, I really I appreciate it, and I probably got time for one more question. You got anything on the docket?
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the time. I think I got one more. I got time for one more good question if you want to hit me up with it.
No, I think we covered a lot. Obviously, I'm sure we could talk forever.
Yeah, it's an honor. I really enjoyed our back and forth, and you know, it really is reassuring in some sense to speak to another like-minded professional instructor because I'm worried about the future of Krav Maga. I really am, and my hope is that all of the sort of the fly-by-nights will do exactly that, and that the legitimate instructors will be around. I think that for the law-abiding citizenry, Krav Maga is a great method, and you know, it's you build a wonderful family, wonderful relationships, and just find a good instructor. You know, really, year one, so your students are lucky.
I hope so. Yeah, it's good.
I mean, really do.
Yeah. How can when is your new book coming out?
It'll be published June 1st by YMAA. It'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble here in the U.S. And available. And it's pretty. I'm excited to release this one. We got about 180 photo series dealing with multiple opponents between cars, hallway, dealing with road rage. You know, looking about how to avoid it. Some illegal stuff in the U.S. that we're looking at, but then there's strategies against footwork, knife. So it's really a Kirkus Review said it's a very comprehensive Krav Maga manual, which was the goal. So I was glad to hear that.
That's good. How can people find you online?
I've got a website, an eponymous website, which is www.davidkahnkravmaga.com. And we've also got IsraeliKrav.com. I'll get any messages that are sent along. Yeah. And whenever you're in New York next, you got to come train with me. I'd love to see you.
Yeah, well, when it calms down, COVID and the violence, and then we'll definitely be over there for sure. Oh, well, sure. Thanks for having on, and send me on any links you need to. And
you bet. And I'll get your address for the publisher. But collect to everybody. Thank you for the time, John.
Yeah. Have a good day.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.